Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Poetry Tuesday. I have a lovely, touching poem to read to you today, and it comes from an unlikely source. I've already said it's lovely and touching, and yet I found it in the FSG Poetry Anthology. We've gone back to this volume a few times. This came out at the end of last year, so it's still in your bookstores. But I had a couple of wrong turns with poems that I found in this thing, and wondered if that was just a sign of what the whole anthology was like. Then I decided, if you're in need of reassurance for poetry, if you want a poem that's really good, go to the Irish. So I went to Seamus Heaney and found a poem of his called Clearances Part 3. This is from 1987. And it goes like this. When all the others were away at mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes. They broke the silence, let fall one by one like solder weeping off a soldering iron. Cold comforts set between us, things to share gleaming in a bucket of clean water. And again let fall, little pleasant splashes from each other's work would bring us to our senses. So while the parish priest at her bedside went hammer and tongs at the prayers for the dying, and some were responding and some were crying, I remembered her head bent towards my head, her breath in mine, our fluent dipping knives, never closer the whole rest of our lives. The image that is portrayed here is of a relative, probably a son, peeling potatoes with his mother. I would think. It's never explicitly said, but I'm guessing that that's the relationship here. And that there are louder and more trumpeted and public ways to remember someone, but that this serves really well, that this is a lovely, touching moment. I don't know how many of you have peeled potatoes. I don't know how many of you have peeled potatoes with someone else. Like, for instance, again, let fall, little pleasant splashes. Do you know what the splash there refers to? Maybe not. Maybe this doesn't really call up anything for you, except the intimacy of the moment, which this poet does really well. I have my issues with this poet. I have had my issues with this poet for a long time. I don't like the laziness. I don't like the idiomatic slang that this poet is very intentional that it's there. Seamus Heaney wanted it to be there, and he had reasons for wanting it to be there, for wanting poetry not to be this highfalutin thing up on Mount Helicon. But even so, the second line there, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes, to be all yours, I'm all yours for some task, is idiom. There are better ways to do it. And the same thing with the second line of the second stanza, where the parish priest went hammer and tongs at the prayers for the dying at her bedside. So she's dying in the second stanza. And he goes at it hammer and tongs, which is also an idiomatic phrase. When I like to think of poetry as refining out that lazy language, the language that does all the work on its own, in order to make it new, in order to make it permanent. I think this poem does a good job of that. I love the ending, her breath in mine, our fluent dipping knives, never closer the whole rest of our lives. Absolutely love that. That is a true moment, as we often talk about on our daily poems. We often talk about the fact that poets can capture true moments, especially quick, delicate, evanescent moments that don't have anything else to commemorate them. I especially love how this poem explicitly notes that fact, that there are all sorts of the parish priest at the bedside or the others away at mass. There are public and very visual, very obvious commemorations going on here, both of togetherness in the first stanza and of grieving in the second stanza. What was it again? And some were responding and some were crying. Whereas the narrator is not doing any of that public stuff in either case. In the first case, the narrator is very privately sharing great communion with the subject of the poem without needing to troop off to mass. And in the second stanza, the narrator of the poem is sharing an unbelievably poignant intimacy that doesn't have anything to do with the loud profession of the prayers for the dying or with crying over those prayers. Neither one. It's instead all very, very personal. In a way that I love, and not just because the poem is from the 1980s, when all the world made sense. It's not just that. And it's also not just because it's from a poet who I really like. So there you go. That is Clearances Part 3 for today. That's your poem for today. A lovely little moment captured by Shay Heaney. So we don't have to worry. We have sanctified this volume again. I don't have to get rid of it. I can keep this in the rotation for our poetry anthologies. But I think it's been a while since we returned to the Norton Anthology of Poetry. I think we should probably do that next time. But who knows what mood will take me. I'm such a feckless little thing. One way or another, I will try to find you something we can talk about and that you will enjoy. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you next time. Thank you, BookTube.